All right, well, let's get to the topic du jour, which is OTAs, the Texans in practice. And there's a story related to this that Tom Pelissero tweeted out, but we'll get to that in a few moments. Here we are, ND, and OTAs. You tell us, what do players get from OTAs? How effective is it? How important is it to get acclimated?
It depends on where you are in your career. You know, when you're a young guy who was a late round pick and still trying to fight for that roster, you use the OTAs to show the coach, hey, I'm in shape. I did everything I was supposed to do during our short time off. If you're a guy that's experienced like Schultz, you can use it to say, during this time, the tight end Schultz, for those who don't know who I'm speaking of, I'm just going to focus on one or two things. You know, I'm going to go get my running in, and this is the route that I have the most trouble with, for example, so this is what I'm going to work on. So depending on where you are in your career, depending on how solidified you are in making the team, that's how your approach changes when it comes to OTAs.
So how much, and maybe this is the same answer, Andy, but how much did you experiment with things in OTAs? Like, you learned a move or you saw something that somebody was using, you thought you could use it as well. Did you experiment with those certain things? I know now back then there was a little bit more contact, I think.
Yes.
And the CBA came in 2011 and kind of stopped some of that. But did you kind of experiment with some of those things, like a new move, using your hands in a different way? Was that the time to experiment with it, or do you want to do that in training camp when you get the pads on?
No, absolutely. Again, it goes to the first part of what I said, depending where you are in your career. So my first couple of years when I was just trying to make the team, it was like, okay, what's coach want us to do? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, what they're specifically asking for. After you sign that contract where you have a little more comfort in knowing that you're going to be on the team, then it's like, you know what? My double swipe isn't quite where it's going to be. Whether or not coach is working on that, that's what I'm going to work on during these OTAs. And you nailed it. Not to be the old back in my day guy, but back in my day, OTAs were pretty much mini camp. I mean, we did one-on-ones. We pretty much got after it so you could actually focus on a couple of moves and techniques.
All right, you being a veteran and a great observer of what is happening now in the NFL, let's get to this Pelissero story about the possibility of changing the way the offseason is organized, Johnny.
So the NFL Players Association right now is working to finalize a proposal to change offseason starting as soon as next year, eliminating voluntary on-field work in the spring in favor of a longer training camp ramp-up with players reporting in mid-June to early July. The union has been seeking feedback on a plan from players, majority of whom support the change. A formal proposal is expected this year. Off-season work rules are collective bargaining. Any changes require an agreement with the NFL. They've consulted medical, performance experts, and they think this would be something they would do. Now, virtual classroom work would still be permitted in the spring, but no practice as we know it in OTAs would be until camp. The last tweet from Pelissero is interesting. The NFLPA push for a revised offseason isn't directly tied to an 18-game season. However, it's worth noting a longer schedule would further shorten the time between the season and training camp. Another reason consolidating players' time off into one long break would make sense. Andy, just your thoughts, gut reaction.
I hate it. I hate it. You know, in one breath, as a player, we want to remind people, hey, this is my job, this is my occupation. Right. Then in the next breath, we're saying, oh, we need more time off. I mean, how much time off do you get in a quote-unquote regular job?
Yeah,
I hear that
job,
term.
Yeah.
You know, if you're lucky, 2 weeks out of the year. This is the dream job. If you have to move your ass to a different city, different state year-round while you're on the roster, oh, well, you're getting paid, you know, at the very minimum, 6 digits up to millions of dollars. Like, and I get it. I understand, get as much as you can in this world and take whatever they're willing to give you. But let's not forget, this is the dream job to play in the NFL. Myself, I'm a Texan. You know, I grew up in San Antonio. I went to college in Houston. I had to move to Philadelphia. Oh, no, I have to live in Philadelphia year-round, you know, living out a dream. It's going a little too far with negotiating time off and not having to be in the city that pays you. I don't like it, but you know what? If y'all want to pay me not to show up, I'll do that as well. But at the same time, these players need to realize this is their occupation, and the team that's paying you, it's okay to be required to be in that state.
So we've talked about this a little bit. Obviously, we've gone from 16 to 17 games.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's inevitable. We're going from 17 to 18. Like, that's been out there for years. They took it step by step, and it does appear we're getting to 18 games. What would you have thought about 18 games? I say this because I've seen so many players like you, N.D., that played in the trenches, offense, defensive line. I would see them in week 14, 15, 16, and I mean, they can barely make it from the meeting room to the cafeteria and back. So 18 games. What would that be like on your body? And when you think back, it's just 2 more games, but it's 2 more games. It's 120 minutes of just more car crashes and collisions for your body. What are your thoughts on 18 games?
If you have smart people running each team and people that actually understand what your body goes through, then I'm okay with it. Now, if you add 2 more games, like you said, that's like 2 more car crashes that your body's going through. But at the same time, I'm assuming there's going to be less preseason games.
Right.
Then that's where you have to have the coaches, like a D'Amico Ryans, who's actually been through it, who's going to say, you know what, we're going to take the pads off after week, whatever it may be.
Right.
Or I understand Coach Kubiak was great with this. He would actually, because he was a former player, he would actually be looking at some of the older guys. And I remember one day I thought I had a pretty good practice, and he told me, hey, tomorrow you're down. And I was like, oh, what happened? Like, are you going to sit me this week? And he was just like, no, you've been in the league 10 years. You know, you don't need this wear and tear on your body if you're expected to show up on Sunday. So if you have coaches like that, 18, 19, 20 games, let's do it. More money in your pocket.
That's a good point.
Back to the offseason thing, though, because it's a 9-week offseason program the way it stands now. It's not mandatory.
Right.
But you start sometime in April, and most of it is conditioning and meetings until you ramp up to stuff on the field. Then you have the mini camp, and then the break. So in the would you rather department, would you rather have that or have all that time off to work out on your own, and then you check in late June or whatever the case may be? They're not going to have a 9-week roll up to the first preseason game, but I would imagine it would be 4, 5, 6 weeks or something like that. I think you'd have to have 5 or 6 weeks minimum if you don't have the 9-week program. So in the would you rather department, which one would you rather have?
I personally, it kind of goes against what I said earlier. I would rather have as much time off as possible. So, you know, most of the guys understand that they're pros. And the cool thing about the time off is, you know, when you have 53 guys on a roster and 90 guys, I think at this point, trying to make a team, everyone gets ready in their own way. You know, some guys hire nutritionists, masseuse, you know, different trainers to work on different things. So I get saying, hey, I want to work my specific trait. But yes, to answer your question, Mark, I would rather have as much time off as possible, knowing that I was going to get my work in. But I wouldn't complain if I was required to show up to work. That's the part that all this negotiating more time off, I just never understood it. Like, oh, well, my family's in this city and I play here. Well, you know what? Move your family or make we have soldiers who don't see their families for months at a time. Yeah. If you can't figure out a way to fly up your boo to come hang out for a weekend, then that's just, you know, your financial intelligence might need to be in question. I just the whole more and more time off. But at the same time, of course, you're going to take more time off if they're willing to give it to you.
Andy, when do you remember there being a focus on nutritionists, individual trainers, you know, whatever the you know, masseuses? Like, I remember reading about Roger Craig getting massages after games when he was with the Niners, and that was in the late 80s. But I feel like this, like each player's got kind of a team of people, and I don't remember that. I don't remember how far back that goes. Do you remember that happening and seeing it kind of in the locker room, like guys that had kind of, I don't call them entourages, that kind of gives it a bad connotation, but like a team around them that they would go to, oh, I got to see my masseuse. I got to go to my nutritionist. Do you remember that happening?
At that time, it was usually the big money guys. Yeah. I remember when T.O., Terrell Owens, came to Philadelphia. That was my first time really seeing it. Like a lot of guys, they would utilize massage therapists, but it wouldn't be like a part of their team, as you would say. Right. It was like, I'm going to, you know, just massage therapists, chiropractors. Right. But it was the big money guys, because even me, I know I needed a chiropractor, but I heard it was like $200 an hour. I was like, nah, you know what? I'll just suck it up. I'll suck it up. So it was, you know, I don't want to name any names outside of T.O., but when T.O. first came, and he had a positive influence on our locker room when he first came, but he was the first guy that you saw had a chef, you know, you saw would train him with the band workouts. And then when you see his body, you're like, oh yeah, he's investing in his business. Now it seems like everybody has it, even the low money guys. And I'm okay with that, because I do believe today's generation, as far as NFL players, they work smarter, not harder, and they're investing in their bodies as if it's their company, and I can respect that.
Yeah.
N.D., when you played, the Eagles were one of your teams. Donovan McNabb, the quarterback, went to a Super Bowl, 5 NFC Championship games. They had that run going on. You were part of that era, and the team had this target on its back. The team was one of the very best in the league. McNabb, one of the best quarterbacks. I know there was a lot of debate about his abilities, but my gosh, the results are there to prove it. What was it like having those expectations, especially this time of year, off-season, leading up, as everyone's getting ready individually and as a team when they can? And then what can you convey to these players here after having the one really fun, great year that the Texans had, but a lot of young guys, and they need to be able to follow that up against a much tougher schedule? What would you say to them? What can you tell us about that whole dynamic?
You know, when we were in Philly, Coach Andy Reid did a great job realizing what type of guys had to be in the locker room, you know, to keep that going. And most of the guys, even though, like you said, we had that very good run up until the conference championship games, most years is when we would get knocked out. But we had guys like that was just the expectation. That's what we expected. We knew we had that target. We were ready for it. And Coach Reid did such an awesome job as far as delegating responsibility, putting in great leaders from the defensive line coach to the late Jim Johnson, who was, in my opinion, the best defensive coordinator in the game, and the players to fit that. You know, we didn't really have big ego guys. Brian Dawkins, one of the best safeties to ever play the game. You wouldn't know that he was that guy by the way he carried himself. As far as work ethic, you would know, but I'm saying he was very humble, and he just wanted to win and do it as a team. And I'm starting to see that. And I'm not just saying it because we're here on Texan Radio, but I see that with this team, with DeMeco Ryans, with the leadership that they've put in place. And then you have C.J. Stroud. I mean, you talk about Donovan McNabb, who I feel like was a great leader on the offensive side of the ball. I see a lot of the same qualities in C.J. Stroud. So if you could continue to get the players to buy in, I mean, this run can be as long as we want it to be.
And along those lines, Andy, you've mentioned Gary Kubiak, you mentioned Andy Reid. And I'm not saying that DeMeco Ryans is in that class yet. He's just coached 1 year in the NFL. However, it feels like he's got traits from those two particular guys that had an influence on you. What are your thoughts about DeMeco and what he is as a coach and how important he is to what this run ends up being?
When you look at DeMeco, and if you know him, you know he's the perfect guy for this position just because of his personality, his different, you know, character attributes. This is a guy that's not going to get too high. Now, he's going to be pumped.
Right.
You know, he's going to, you know, pump his fist and jump up like a player when good things happen on the field. But after a loss, he's not going to sit up there and try to rearrange their whole thought process. After a win, he's not going to kick his feet up on the table and light up a cigar and say, we've arrived. And I think that's a huge quality when you talk about sustaining success.
Yep.
Like, if you ask DeMeco away from the cameras, away from the microphone about last year, he's probably going to be disappointed because it didn't end in the Super Bowl. But he'll say all the right things to keep his guys motivated, and that's what you need to have.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely have the right coach here. There's no doubt about that. And like I said, handling that part of it, the expectations, how the guys handle it, that is going to be really interesting to see him navigate through this whole process. Andy Reid, I know I must have asked you this before, but let's go with this because Andy Reid has evolved as a head coach. Or is the evolution simply, I have Patrick Mahomes now? You tell me how he's changed, if at all, through the years, because you had him 2 decades ago and he was really successful then. He's even more successful now.
You know, I think he's stuck with his plan. I mean, this is a guy that, and I'm not privy to seeing what he's saying, what he's doing every day like I did when I played for him for 5 years, but I don't know. That's a great question, Mark. I don't know if he's changed or if the success is because he's stuck with his plan regardless of the outside noise. You know, when he was fired, when he was run out of Philadelphia because he didn't win the big game, he was still a great coach. And I think he just stuck with his guns. And then you add in a great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, then the success and the Super Bowls are going to come. But I just, from what I hear from the guys that are still in that inner circle, he hasn't really changed. He's stuck with it. I don't care how great of a coach you are. Only one person, as far as a head coach, is going to win the Super Bowl every single year. Yeah. And there's so many things that are going to influence who that head coach is, from the players to the system to the assistant coaches. So you could be doing everything right as a head coach and still not win it. And I think that was the case with Andy Reid in Philadelphia. I can't say he was the perfect coach or we would have won Super Bowls, but he was a coach that didn't need to change anything as far as the way he was doing things with us. And for whatever reason, the city of Philadelphia, Jeffrey Lurie, who's a good team owner, said it was time for a change. He goes to Kansas City, sticks to his guns. You add in arguably the best quarterback in the game right now, and you're going to have some Super Bowl wins.
Yeah, no doubt. Andy, one of the big talking points this early, late spring, whatever time frame it's been, has been the talk of J.J. Watt coming back and coming back to the game. And I've always said the people you got to ask are the guys that have played down there and experienced 50 car crashes in a particular game, take a year off or retire for a year and then come back to it. What's the biggest hurdle, and what do you remember for you, and whether you wanted to come back or not? But when did you feel like, okay, the game is I'm done, I'm not coming back? But what's the biggest hurdle in coming back, do you think, for anybody that would think about playing your position for how many ever years JJ's played, retired for a year, and then comes back to it? I know he's a different kind of athlete, but how tough would that be?
Oh, it'll be very tough. And if it was anybody except for maybe one or two players, I would say it just wouldn't happen. But if somebody could make it happen, I feel like it would be J.J. Watt. Yeah. And it depends on what injuries you're coming back from. Now, obviously, I was in the same stratosphere as J.J. as an NFL player. But for me, both my knees were shot. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't.
Right.
If J.J. feels healthy and feels the part, he's one of the very few guys that I would say he could take time off, come back if he accepts whatever role they give him, and still be productive. Don't forget, his last year, he had 12 and a half sacks.
Yeah, he was good.
I didn't expect him to retire.
Right,
12 and a half sacks is a career year for 90% of edge players. So I think it would be great to see him come back.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
How would your body acclimate again? If you think about that, if you think about, okay, this was the last year I played, took a year off, do you have any idea how your body would react to all of a sudden, hey, I haven't had all these hits for 365 days, and now, oh my God, I hurt everywhere again?
Keep in mind, most of our bodies would react a certain way. He's not normal. This is a guy that was 300 pounds doing 6 feet box jumps without taking a step. So, and again, not to glaze over JJ or whatever these kids say, but I just give props where props are due. Yeah. It's going to hurt.
Yeah.
He's going to have, if he does it, he's going to have nights where he's like, why am I doing this? But if anybody could come back and be productive in the form of 6-7 sacks and showing Will Anderson and giving Danielle Hunter a breather but still being productive, I think he's the guy to do it.
All right, let's go to the young. We went with the older guy, JJ, and now to the younger guy, Will Anderson Jr., who has his sophomore season, I'll put that in air quotes, coming up. What about year 1 to year 2, the jump for him? Because Watt took a tremendous leap from year 1 to year 2, really emerged late in year 1, and Will had some amazing moments and defensive rookie of the year. So what are our expectations right now?
Just to continue, what makes him great, his motor, his violent hands, and his approach to the game. I don't see that changing from year 1 to 2. Everything I'm hearing about Will Anderson and seeing as far as practices and OTAs, he's still that hungry. There isn't one move I say, oh, he needs to work on. He just needs to continue to do what he's done. As far as the stats, I know some people at some part of the year last year, oh, his sacks are down, but they don't realize that you can be an effective edge player. John, you know this as much, if not more than most people, and have a game where you don't have a sack, but you had a good game because you were disruptive in the backfield. You put the pressure on the quarterback. Because there was so much focus on stopping you, you opened up your 3 technique that's lined up next to you or the other defensive end. That's what you saw out of Will Anderson. Now, there's no way I would compare him to Jadeveon Clowney because they seem to be 2 different personalities. But as far as year 1 and the stats and the people who are expecting to see 15, 16 sacks, I think he had that Jadeveon Clowney type season where if you actually watch the film, you see the disruption and you see how productive he truly was.
And Danielle Hunter he's a really interesting guy because I remember when we signed him, Mark was like, well, what did you think? I said, he's chopping and swiping and spinning and never stops. It's like he's got this just relentless bag of tricks in some sense. Who was the guy that you played with that was kind of like that, just had crafty pass rush moves and I mean, Danielle Hunter's a really good athlete, but he's got so many different moves that he can use at all times. Did you have a guy that you played with that was kind of this crafty pass rusher that no matter what, he was getting to the quarterback in some way, shape, or form?
Bruce Smith.
Oh, really?
And it sounds crazy to say Bruce Smith because he's one of the best athletes ever played.
Right.
But when I played with him, he was 38.
Right.
So when they first signed him to Washington, and we were doing our OTAs, they told me, hey. So a little background story. So after the previous year, I thought, oh, I've arrived. Like, I'm the man. Like, I've earned my spot. So I thought I was going to start. Then Coach Turner pulls me in and said, hey, we're signing somebody, and he's probably going to start ahead of you. And it's a true story. And I was like, well, you haven't even given me a chance to compete. Then it's we're signing Bruce Smith. I was like, okay. I'll take that back seat. Like, okay, cool. So we're going through OTAs and running wind sprints, and he was working out smart. I'm not saying that I was faster than him, but he knew when to push himself. So I was thinking, like, man, I know he's probably the best to ever do it, but can he play? And he showed me his bag of tricks. And then when I would see him do it in the game, and he wasn't the fastest off the ball, he wasn't the strongest at that point, but those bag of tricks and the different moves, the variety of moves, and he was out there playing chess when everybody else was playing checkers in regards to when you're going to use certain moves. And that's what makes the great players who last 10, 12, 15 years, like a Hunter, last, because they understand like the techniques and the hand placements and all the ancillary aspects of being a pass rusher.
Yeah.